My next question was to Alexis. Alexis, thank you again for joining this panel. As I say, I'm the Member of Parliament for Watford, and on this panel we've heard many testimonies, and as I understand it, if it's okay to mention, you've got first-hand experience of being detained in an assessment and treatment unit. I was keen to understand what you think the impact would have been on you if you had been denied visits from friends and family, please.
Well, look, I mean, as Alison's pointed out, admission is traumatic, and it usually comes, after years of abuse and a real build-up of trauma, stigma, and isolation. And I was in hospital for 3.5 years, sometimes hundreds of miles away from home. And so visitation is such a huge part of connection and recovery, and especially if, like me, you've been detained for a long time. A visitation is often the only link, as Alison said, to the outside world. However, even I suppose if you've been in hospital for a short time, the effects of it, not seeing family and friends can be enormous. And it can literally be the difference between having the will to live and wanting to give up. The straw that breaks the camel's back, so to speak. So for me, visitation formed, part of my weekly routine. I'd like to see my mother and daughter every day at visiting time. And without that, I would have missed my daughter growing up. But more importantly, my family provided, that stability, which is missing from ward environments. Most units are able to accommodate this daily visitation, but obviously with COVID, I can't imagine what people are going through, because for me, I felt happier when I saw my family, like I mattered, and the visit structured my day, and they were the only thing I looked forward to. They provided me with something to live for. And so from a practical perspective as well, which I think is really important, I relied on my mother to bring me food that I preferred. Autistic people and people with neurodevelopmental conditions like E might have unique diets which are not accommodated in hospitals. And so when my mother wasn't able to come, and I had 3 months where I was denied visits in a hospital that I was in, 15 kilos, because it wasn't accommodated. And so, because I'm autistic, and when routine is broken, it creates a dysregulation, a real inner turmoil where my whole sensory system's on fire, my skin's burning, my eyes are burning, my ears are burning, and that kind of dysregulation that I felt, is often a direct result of the ward environment and having a routine broken, and obviously this results in, as Alison has said, restrictive practices, restraint, seclusion, forced medication, which obviously adds to more trauma. Just finally, I just want to say, that when I was in hospital, visitation was the only contact that I had with the outside world. And once I didn't, as I say, have visitors for 3 months, I was cut off from my community, and it is so isolating and it's so lonely, and it has, an even greater negative impact on your mental health. Over those 3 months, people, because I was separated, become such a source of anxiety. And I can imagine this is happening with COVID, because you get adapted to your new kind of insular and disconnected normal. And being locked inside when you're not allowed to see visitors, you have to then relearn how to interact and kind of pluck up the courage to see people when you are allowed to again. And that happened to me in just 3 months. Now, on a personal note, in my experience in one hospital, I was worried for my safety. And when my mum and dad weren't inside, the culture of the interactions change, and staff are more punitive and maybe don't accommodate requests as freely. For example, my mum and dad would always ask, what I'd done and expect to see me when they visited. And when they didn't come for those 12 weeks, they didn't even get to go outside in the garden to get some fresh air. Activities were restricted and such like. So ultimately, seeing your family is normal, isn't it? And it's another reminder, I think, that these restrictions mean that actually we're not normal. We're not quite human, and it's not something we should have to beg for, even in a pandemic.
And can I ask, thank you so much for that. Just very, very briefly, before I go to my next question, could I just ask, would the measures such as window visits, iPad time to see family and so on during the lockdown period have made a difference to you? If you see what I mean, appreciating that perhaps physical visits may not have been possible, would those other measures at least have been some relief?
Yeah, I mean, of course they make a difference, but it's nothing in compared to seeing your family. You know, it's a scrap, isn't it? And for people that can't use devices or that struggle to communicate, I'm autistic, and when I was in hospital, you know, for periods of time I was mute and certainly wasn't communicating the way that I'm communicating with you now. So it's just not sufficient, and it's not a reasonable adjustment, and it won't meet everybody's needs. It won't meet most people's needs that have neurodevelopmental conditions.